That's
There
me.
you are. It's definitely you. Thank you so
Hmm.
much for talking to the Rock Pit today. I've been immersed
Pleasure.
in the album for the last couple of weeks now, so it's wonderful to get an opportunity to talk about it. It's how long was
Oh,
this
that's
one?
that's that's very kind of you. Thank you.
How long was this? How long did it take to come together?
I think it was about 5 years. We The first Cars and Girls record came out 24 years ago, and then there was a stage play of What Rhymes with Cars and Girls, not written by me. It was written by a gentleman, Aidan Fennessy. He suggested that he could hear a narrative in the first album, and I didn't hear that. So he said, "Well, will you at least take a meeting with me?" And I did, fully prepared just to say no. I don't see the sense in it. And he was so charming and smart and funny. And so I walked out of there thinking, yeah, this is the greatest idea ever. And that getting theatre shows up and running takes years. And so for about 2 years, that album was back in my life. And then performances, I was on stage with the actors as a musical director and doing a little bit of acting. And so I'd just be hearing these songs night after night after night after night in rehearsals, talking to the actors about how to. They both wanted to know more about it, and so it was a exaggerated process, and it probably did my head in. It was very very pleasurable to be with those people, but revisiting some part of your life, even just as a writer, when you're 27, 28, is a little bit meta, odd
Yeah.
feeling. And so it was, I was getting a little bit screwy on stage, and so started as a writing exercise to try and calm myself down, write sequels or responses to each of those songs as they were being, maybe a song would be finished on stage and then there'd be dialogue, and my character on stage could be largely just distracted as a musician. And so I was sort of writing it in not in real time, but again that meta. I don't know much about theatrical terms. I've studied theatre, but I've just never understood it. And so anyway, I wrote a lot of songs and I let it sit for a couple of years, and then during the worst of the virus in Melbourne, I contacted Jen Anderson. She and I made the Cars and Girls record together with a bunch of her friends, and I said, "Look, I've got this idea. I'm wondering what you think." And she was very very supportive. And I spoke to a couple of other people about it who were involved in the first record, and they didn't think it was a terrible idea. And so we just kept pushing on, and I managed to borrow some money to get into the studio, and we made it, and it was very emotional and kind of fulfilling. And then at other times, I don't know if anyone ever leaves a record completely satisfied, but at some point you've got to say stop. And so I think the day after we stopped it, I went back on the road playing shows with the Hard-Ons, and so there's that, from here to there, and you have to concentrate on another project, and now we're back touring it and living it again. So whew,
It must be
quite
interesting. I mean, going through that process of looking at, I guess, what's essentially part of your past again. Did you get hypercritical of yourself during the stage production?
yeah. I thought that some of the songwriting was just a bit lazy, and there were lines and sentiments in the songs. And I was speaking with a friend of mine who's a journalist, and it was for an interview a couple of weeks ago, and he suggested, "Well, Tim, it's perhaps you were representing a character back then. Have you ever thought of that, rather than, I guess, as songwriters, it's not always just your own truth out there." And so I had to actually think again, revisit particularly the first song with lyrics on Cars and Girls. And I thought, well, maybe I was playing a bit of, because I found it a bit, I don't really care as much as I gave, and what the hell, let's just move on. And I love you, sure, but I'm moving away. And for years I thought, well, I don't know if I felt like that. That's a bit too bullshit macho thing, but it's perhaps I was writing as a character. There's been a lot of things gone on since then,
Yeah.
and so
I was going to say, it's interesting, isn't it, when other people must see things in your work that you don't necessarily consider at the time.
yeah, I mean, I read a lot of interviews with other writers and prose writers and poets and songwriters in particular, and it happens a lot. Music can um, obfuscate, obfuscate what goes on lyrically, because I guess if you're doing the musical performances in tandem with lyrics, often the music is either giving the true sentiment, while the lyrics may be in a little bit of characterful and a little bit of just not quite true, and then other times the music may seek to make light of a heavy situation going on lyrically. And so that I've always had a problem for, I've got lots of problems, but when people talk about lyrics as being, well, they're not lyrics, they're poetry, as if poetry was a higher form of art to songwriting. And then I'd resented that for a while, because I think I don't think that's necessarily true. And what's wrong with just calling someone a great songwriter rather than saying, oh no, they're a poet? But if you're a songwriter, your lyrics are set to music. And I guess the big difference with poetry is that the music is all internal within that scansion and within the words, and yet us musicians have the benefit of adding extra layers to things, or accompanying. So often the words can be not as great as maybe we all want them to be, because we are doing it in tandem with music. So I've got to back away from getting annoyed about that, elevating lyrics to poetry. It's very rare that song lyrics can sit by their own, because they're not supposed to, really. They're song lyrics. They're part of a song. And so, as you can see, I haven't sorted out the conundrum at all. But it's a never-ending process.
I mean, Dylan got his reward for his poetry, I guess, or his songwriting, and there's some wonderful songwriters out there. I mean, you're one of my favourite, because lyrically you sort of remind me of guys like Ray Davis and some of the greats, I guess, of yesteryear.
Well, I'm pretty critical of the ones who are my favourites. Ray, for example, who at times I've really loved, and at times I've just been so not disappointed by. I just don't quite understand where his inspiration is. And I spent a bit of time with Ray. It was years ago, but the photographer Tony Mott asked me to accompany him on a photo shoot with Ray. And so Tony called me and said, "You're my assistant for the day." And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about photography." And he said, "No, you don't understand. We're going to spend the afternoon with Ray Davies." And so we did. And Ray actually didn't sound check, because we were just drinking broken wood cricket pitch wine and talking about cricket. And Tony, who's very loquacious and very charming, him, Ray, were just talking about London and Sheffield and cricket and football, and it was just heavenly. And I had a whole bunch of questions rattling around in my head, but they were all just as a fan, and I chose not to really ask anything apart from just current affairs questions, because I guess he's being asked enough. And I passed him on the street in Hampstead a couple of years ago, and the person I was walking with said, "There's Ray. He's a hero. Why don't you go over and say hello?" And I thought, well, there's nothing I can say to him that's going to make his day any better. And if I'm actually a fan, let's just leave him alone. He looked like he wanted to be left alone, so I did.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you do get those opportunities? I mean, I spent a few hours with Dave a few years ago, and wonderful conversations. But we rarely
Mm.
touched upon music, which I guess can be refreshing for artists sometimes. That
I think it depends on the time of the day or the actual day. I mean, yeah, I'm not
I
sure. I
mean,
guess
I guess the
when
whole fan thing.
the whole what, sorry?
Whole fan thing, the fact that everyone, I guess, needs to tell you about how much your music means to them, and when you've heard that a million times before.
It's happened lately with some projects I've done, speaking to authors. Robin Davidson recently, I'm such a big fan of, and yet I was trying not to ask the typical questions and trying not to. And she asked me afterwards, she said, "Well, you didn't ask me anything about my famed romantic life." And I said, "Well, Robin, it's if people are wanting to ask you about that all the time, I don't want to ask you." And um, I ran into Tim Winton a couple of years ago, and nothing I could say would not give away what a fan I was and how much I admired him. And I'm also very critical of him as well, because he's one of my favourites. Richard Flanagan, I had a couple of sessions with over the past couple of years, and trying to make it somehow interesting for them as well. But there's nothing I can talk about them literarily that would really be of interest, because I guess for people as skilled as that, they really do their research and that's what they work on. So it's sometimes I think just be a fan. I like fans of other performers. I like nerds about, whether it be about gardening or, and definitely about music. I mean, recently, sort of being exposed to a lot of Genesis records and definitely the Grateful Dead, and who I just completely dismissed both bands in the past, thinking that they were the enemy. And at times they still sound like the enemy, but there's some wonderful music out there, and suddenly you've got this new community of people who you can just be fans with, and talk and write letters and swap bootlegs, and that
I
makes it
know,
all
I,
worth it.
I know exactly what you mean. The last time I saw you on stage, you were supporting one of my favourite bands, and you made the erroneous claim that you were a bigger fan than me of the Black Crows.
Well, it's yeah. Look, I do love that band, and I don't think that Chris or Rich in particular have been involved in making a bad record ever. There's been some songs that have been a little, but the quality of what they do is out of control. And my first meeting with Chris decades ago was not great. We were both at very different times of our life. One sort of wealthy and prosperous, and the other, who was me, was in a very low point. And but this time was really great. I guess the thing we had lots of friends in common and acquaintances and people that we worked with, and that was kind of an introduction. It wasn't just that we were on stage together; it's that we had these people in common. And when in Melbourne, they went into Under a Mountain, and I lost my mind because I love that song so much. And Chris came running over to the side of stage and just gave me this big hug and said, "You're the only person in this building who got really excited that we ever played that song." And I thought that was kind of sweet.
It's a wonderful song, one of my favourites too. I was about 8 rows back, but he couldn't quite get to me. So, I actually saw that, but I think I mentioned that moment in the review I put up. But yeah, wonderful band. How do songs come to you, though? I mean, like, it strikes me as someone who's particularly prolific, and does it always come easy?
Yeah. Starting songs comes pretty easy. Finishing them is difficult always, because I seem pretty happy just to go through the day, just sort of daydreaming, and whether I'm doing my day job or just wandering around. Yeah, all these sparks going off, and you see things that you want to represent and also to make sense of by accompanying with music, or with a prose, a short story or something. And it happens more often than not that situations that you find very difficult to understand without getting either very upset or ecstatically happy. And because when the way I'm wired, you have to watch getting ecstatically happy or very sad, and you have to try and keep it there. And an easy way to do that, an easier way, is to try and apply that to the written word or to music. And so starting songs, there'll probably be some happen today. You know, I'm actually at home for unfortunately a very short time, but there are instruments around, and starting songs is great, you know. And listening to a new Todd Snyder record, or I was listening to an old Waylon Jennings record called Old Waylon just yesterday, and immediately wanted to write something. You know, I sort of wasn't satisfied with just being ecstatic about listening to this record, or definitely Todd's new live record, and thought, oh, I want a little bit of that. You know, I want to try and write something with, if not a similar sentiment, then something that will calm me down almost, you know, by writing about it. And but recently with I think that I've kind of, for a little time anyway, I've reached the end of my tether musically. And so for the new Hard-Ons record, that's Blackie did all the music for that, and I just wrote lyrics for about 3 or 4 songs. And maybe for the next You and I record, Dave will write all the music, and I'll just write some melodies and the lyrics as well. I'm glad that we're not in that position where no one's dying to hear the next thing that I'm involved in. We just do it when we feel like it. And so maybe that kind of feeling that I can do something musically worthwhile will come back. I hope so. But for the moment, it'll just be writing songs here for my own enjoyment.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's the best way. At the end of the day, that's where the real heartfelt stuff comes from. No, I've just realised it's actually 30 years since the first year on Art this year. Sounded
out. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
I always thought that You and I started when I was younger. I guess that we didn't make Sounds Over till I was 23, maybe. And but the years previous to that were really just trying to we didn't come out of the box fully formed. We just wanted to make some noise, some sort of mix between Aerosmith and the Hard-Ons, and wherever that nexus joins. And yeah, I guess that sounds right. I mean, I've got some pretty interesting memories of making that record in Minnesota. Working with great people.
Well, I mean, anniversaries, I guess, are like these artificial concepts that crop up from now and again. But does it take you back to like when someone says something like that to you? Does it take you back to that moment? It makes you think, wow, that was.
Oh yeah, completely.
Yeah.
It they're very, very strong memories, and particularly the past couple of years, you know, being at home a lot, and did go through old lyric books and old diaries, and very much the little inscriptions that I put in diaries or in whatever books I was reading then, which is probably nothing. I don't think I read for 20 years, but going back to my old university books and the little crib notes I write for myself in what I had to study, they're very much the same as what I'd write now, you know, kind of lots of question marks. And and must research that, and putting definitions of words to look up in the dictionary. You know, that's pretty much what I do now, and there's a real arrested development going on.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I honestly believe that we don't change that much. It's just that we experience more. So I guess even though we think of things in the same way, um, we make a lot more assumptions, I guess, as we get older.
I'll overthink about that. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Assumptions.
I guess come from lived experience. If you've seen something happen before, the likelihood of it happening again in the same way is probably, maybe. We'll leave that one. Next time we speak, we'll talk about that one. It's an interesting name for an album. I was, before I read the publicity, I was just thinking, Tines of Stars. Why don't I know what Tines means?
It's a fork, you know, and I just had a vision. I was in Eastern Tasmania with my partner. She was working on a ballet, and I was pretty much being her handbag. But we were out camping Eastern Tasmania, and one night, I don't know what we'd had the hour before, but I'd had this vision of a big trident in the sky kind of unfurling. And for 23 years, people have been suggesting to me what does rhyme with cars and girls, and I'll say thank you very much, but it was never a question. It was sort of, and Ed Fotheringham, who did the artwork, and I talked about it because he said, I want the question marks to be elsewhere because it's not a question. What rhymes? It's no. This is what rhymes with cars and girls, because when you've exhausted the traditional themes of you know, rock and roll music, relationships and automobiles, when you strip all that away, this is what it means. It's trying to make sense of whether romantic love or difficult situations, in my experience anyway. And so people have suggested what rhymes with cars and girls. Thank you very much. And then these Tines of Stars Unfurled came up in the East Tasmanian sky, and I thought, well, there's a gift. Now I've definitely got to finish this record. And Davey Lane came to me a couple of weeks ago and said, I just got it, you know. It rhymes with cars and girls. And I said, yeah, you know, I didn't want to explicitly say, aren't I smart? Because it's a horribly pretentious album title, but it fits the job description and what we do. You know, we're not going to not do something if it's ambitious or pretentious. So it's a little private joke within ourselves. It's happened quite a bit. People associated with the record helping out, they go, oh, I see what you did there. Well,
yeah, it took me a while, I must admit, but I got there in the end. So it's a great song.
The amount of times you do things just for your own amusement. I mean, you might as well. And the thought is, well, you give yourself a giggle, and maybe someone else will similarly find it amusing or wry or annoying.
Yeah, there's some great songs on there. It's one of those albums, very rare these days, that you can play from start to finish. I think before we spoke, I'd just gotten up to one of my favourites on there, Up Again, which is an interesting song.
It's I guess getting Sally Dastey, who sang on the first record, on the corresponding song on the first record, was a big deal. And I hadn't seen Sally in 20 years, I reckon. And wanted to, the first song, Upper Ways, is about a kind of a bit of a bickering but horny relationship going on, and that was completely fictitious, but using language that I was familiar with. And I wanted to write a duet that had a bit of sass to it. You know, John Prine and Iris DeMent, although I think In Spite of Ourselves may have come out after that, Cars and Girls, I'm not sure, but something similar. And then rather than write something very similar, I wanted it to be about a romantic couple where one of the partners is relentlessly positive and the other is a lugubrious miserablest, and how they hopefully conflate with their affections, and because to being with someone who's a depressive is difficult, and then if someone's a depressive, they I guess can't really understand. Come on, let's get going, and yet you just let each other know the way you're feeling, and up again. Come on, up again. Let's keep going. You know, chuck your boots on. Let's get walking.
Yeah, it's a great song, and I love that sort of like juxtaposition of the two personalities. It sort of like works beautifully for me. Do you have any favourites? I hate to ask that question, but we always get asked it on the radio.
Yeah. I love 22 because the way it came together, that I think I tried to write songs about being 53 and just kind of didn't really hold much interest to me, because the original song 28 was about people I knew. It wasn't necessarily about myself. And yeah, I've got some interesting people living around me and who are of a similar age, but not enough that was interesting. I thought, well, what really interests me is my daughter and her mates in New York, and particularly how they've navigated the past couple of years, which is a very different experience to the way an old person has experienced it. And so I thought, well, I'm going to write a song about her and her mates, not getting too revealing about her because you know, her life is private, but just the way that they go ahead and get on with things, and really making music these days, and recording with her stepdad, and it's just blowing my mind how good they are and how assured. And so wanted to write a song of love to her and her friends. And then the intro I'd forgotten, but it came from a Link Gray record, a Link Gray solo record with his brother. And I don't often write riffs these days because when you're in a band with Davey Lane and he can play everything, and so it kind of humiliates me into just sticking with three chords and that witty rhyme, witty banter. But I thought I want to write this kind of clunky ba-do-ding, do-do-ding, 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 ba-bum, and it doesn't sound like Link Gray at all. But anytime Davey and I start that song, I think, well, I did actually take that. It's not note for note. I just knew I wanted to write something that sounded a tiny bit like Link Gray, and then we recorded it, and it doesn't sound anything like Link Gray. And I just love that's the process, rather than you just get inspired by something and hopefully you come up with something that sounds like yourself and your band, rather than just stealing something.
Yeah.
So for that reason alone.
Yeah, it's a great album. It's already out. I think 24th of February it came out.
Which is my daughter's 22nd birthday. That's pure coincidence that this song 22 on there, and it came out on her 22nd birthday.
That's great. I'm not sure how long we have. Have we got time for a couple more quick questions just for the radio?
Of course.
We've got a radio show in WA, and we just lead into the interviews with it. So we ask everyone the same question. So one of the last people I would have asked would have been Rich Robinson. So I tried a segment with him that failed called Breakfast with the Stars, which was about what's your favourite breakfast, where, when, and what are you having. So I'd love to try that with you. Tim Rogers, what's your ideal breakfast?
Well, I would normally say a couple of beers, but might give that a break for a while. So I'm just a coffee and if I'm smoking, a couple of cigarettes kind of guy, away from everyone else, and then I clean my teeth and then approach people. But no, I'm not a big breakfast person. Particularly on tour, it's try and get something in for lunch. But brekkie, it's not elaborate. I used to eat tons of porridge every morning, thinking that, well, that'll just get me through the day. But I've kind of gone away from that. And porridge. I'm just reading this biography of D.H. Lawrence at the moment, and during what they call the Spanish flu, which is a little bit racially profiling, but that porridge was thought to be help your immunity, or to help with your a way of fighting off that flu, which I was completely. This is 1919, and up till about 2019, I thought that having a massive bowl of porridge with some chilies and some hot sauce would be the way that I was going to make it through to 50. And I made it through to 50, and so I gave up on the idea.
That's fantastic. I'm going to keep that on going now in your honour. I'm going to call it Tim Rogers' Breakfast with the Stars. If you could have been like a fly on the wall for the creation of any great rock and roll album, what would you love to have seen? It doesn't necessarily have to be your favourite, but what do you think would be one of the most intriguing ones to have witnessed being made?
Well, for decades it was Exile on Main Street, and just wanted to be there. It seems to be a compatible or an enviable lifestyle. The more I get to know about the way that what actually went on in the recording of that album, I think, not exactly sure. So for 30 years it was that. And then I think listening to Foxtrot by Genesis at the moment, a record I just cannot stop listening to, and the making of Supper's Ready. Supper's Ready is a 14, 17-minute song that takes up all of side 2, and it has so many break shifts and turns, and how they navigated that as a band, and just how desperate it all sounds, particularly Peter Gabriel's vocal. I am so fascinated by it that's where I would have loved to have been in the studio.
Yeah, I mean, Genesis are always one of those bands that completely intrigue me, how they went from such a sort of insane creative force to essentially a pop band. It's
yeah, look, and they gave enough to the progressive rock. They provided such a enormous canon of work that if they wanted to be a pop band, good on them,
yeah, exactly.
And that they made some good and some not so great pop music, but they gave enough. It was interesting recently watching a gig from 1980, and Peter had gone long by that stage, and Phil out front, and he sings the devil out of it all. And he does a lot of pop things as well as some older proggier things. But the strength of his singing is just out of control. And I will never tell my brother that, because he has Phil Collins marked for injury. But seriously impressive. And yeah, it's funny. You can just ignore or be oblivious to what bands have done, because you think of them as an archetype of something, and then it just happens. And how it happened for me with them, and how it happened with the Dead and Gong and Faust and all a lot of more progressive stuff. I don't know, it's just the right time in my life to be doing it. I think because I am in country and I've just got a lot of space around me, and so this music kind of makes sense. And in the city, it didn't make as much sense, perhaps.
No, it was interesting for me as well. I mean, that was one of the things the pandemic did for me. I listened to a lot of music that I wouldn't have otherwise even attempted to connect with, and some of it like really resonated and made you think, why haven't I been doing that for the last 20 years? But let's leave you with an easy one. What is the meaning of life?
Well, I think got to quote the great Kurt Vonnegut Jr. that we're here to stuff around, really. You know? but I think it's empathy and actual kindness. You know, I don't think I'm a particularly consistent person, but to err on the side of kindness, I think, is the meaning of it all. There's so much brutality, coldness, and ambition, and that doesn't make sense of like that. Just instantly is causes myself, and I can see the anxiety it causes people, and yet kindness and taking time out to listen to people, and you see what it does to them. It just seems to melt all that. Not the sociopaths; they're going to stay as they are, but no, I think it's empathy and kindness, really, because there's a lot of suffering out there, and we're not going to do anything for it by being brutes. So I think we just need to be malleable and soften ourselves a little.
And just one quick anecdote for you. When I was talking about who I was going to talk to today, to my nan, she said, "I've got a twin set."
Everybody should.
Would I like it? So I'll be playing the album to her later today.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, we wanted
when she's appropriately dressed, obviously.
Yes, of course. Yeah, it was. I think for one show, I wanted to get myself up in a twin set, but I thought that may be a little insulting to folks who that's generally a large part of their life, and to dress in non-traditional clothing, and so I left that alone. But it was Jen's suggestion 24 years ago. Like I wanted to call the band something else, a little less polite, and but she nipped that in the bud, and then we got talking about whether it was not haberdashery, but about crocheting and knitting, and then the twin set came.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Tim. Really appreciate it.
It's lovely to meet you, sir. Thank you very much for your time.
You too. Thanks,
Bye-bye,
mate.
Bye.